Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel and you're watching The Brown Feminist. So in today's video, I'm covering an important topic that you guys have been asking for a while now. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about the long-term career opportunities and career growth and promotions and titles to look forward to within clinical research. So without further ado, let's get into it. So we're going to be making this video to focus on 3 different key areas in which clinical researchers can work. So first of all, we will talk about academia, academic institutes like universities. The second part, we will be talking about sites such as hospitals and clinics. And in the third section, we're going to be talking about CROs or pharma companies. In all these 3 kind of subfields, you can work and build a great career in clinical research. But how they're going to be progressing is going to be a little bit different depending on which of these 3 avenues you work in and you specialize in. So let's jump in with academia. Now in academia, you typically start working off as a research assistant, a clinical research assistant. Academia doesn't have a whole lot of clinical trials unless it's like very specifically in partnership with a hospital site. So a typical clinical research assistant can make anywhere between minimum wage to $30 an hour, $35 an hour. So overall, you can see yourself making anywhere between $30,000 to $50,000 a year in the Canadian job market. The salaries can vary a little bit based on which country you're in. American universities may have slightly higher or slightly lower salary ranges, and it may depend on the state and so on. Now, in order to move up from being a clinical research assistant to being a research associate in academia, you typically need a higher degree. So a research assistant is seen more at the undergraduate level and maybe at the master's level. Typically, to work as a research associate in Canadian universities, in academia, in universities, you would need to have a PhD or you would need to be a PhD student or PhD candidate. And so your salary will go up based on the degrees and qualifications you have. Now, afterwards, of course, if you want to keep going up from being a research assistant to a research associate to eventually becoming a PI or a principal investigator and leading your own research within this field of clinical research, then you will definitely need to have completed your PhD, gotten some extra training and research, maybe in other places, other research institutes, have some teaching experience. And typically PIs in academia have a teaching profile, which means they are affiliated with the university as a lecturer, instructor, assistant or associate professor, a full professor. And then on the side, they're able to do their research projects while also teaching. And almost all of the PIs or principal investigators have PhDs, some postdoctoral training, a great list of publications and research grant applications, and like a whole lot of other things that make a nice resume, that make a nice portfolio to be in that PI position. Oftentimes, it comes hand in hand with your lecturer or assistant, lecturer positions and professorship positions. When you're pitching yourself to get one job, you also have to pitch yourself to be not just an instructor in the class and teaching, but also what kind of research you will bring to that faculty or to that department. So I will be making more videos in the future which will focus on this a little bit more in depth, but you get the idea. If you want to work in clinical research in academia, then your degrees, your publications, and all of these are really important to go up from being a research assistant to clinical research associate to a principal investigator. Another thing that's really important here is your affiliations and collaborations with other research institutes outside of academia. You can be a professor, but you can also maintain your clinical credentials by working a little bit with different hospitals or clinic or research institutes. You can partner with basic scientists, you can partner with physicians or nurses or PTs who are working in the clinical field, and that really keeps your clinical research really robust, really exciting, very translatable. And so when you're going up the ladder, your salary of course increases somewhere from $35,000 a year to $55,000 a year to $60,000 a year. And then your next jump is a little bit higher, from being a research associate to becoming a principal investigator. But typically you don't just finish your PhD and immediately become a lecturer or like as a professor in Canada. In the US, you can do it a little bit faster. You can start teaching even from the master's level, but in Canada, you really need to do some postdoctoral training and experiences, which means after your PhD, you can teach a few courses, but to become like a real permanent faculty member, you need a little bit more training, and that can be achieved by working with other research institutes outside, coming back to the university, getting that kind of lucrative tenured professor position or assistant professor position, and staying there. And salaries there range more in like the 100,000 and 100,000 plus range. However, that really depends on the number of courses you are teaching, the level of courses, like first year, second year, third year, fourth year courses you are teaching, the amount of additional positions you take on within the university, like chairs of different boards and chairs of different research panels, as well as the kind of research grants you bring in. Sometimes you can get some salary awards for doing different kinds of research and building research programs. So that salary does not always come from just the university, which is your primary employer, but can come from multiple sources and can be coming from multiple components of your roles. When you're willing to cut back down a little, you can get paid a little less. When you're willing to like take on a little bit more, you can make closer to 100 to 200 grand a year. But it usually takes some time. You don't just like become assistant professor and start making the big bucks. You usually need to kind of build your research portfolio and your image within the faculty and just grow your identity as a researcher in that field, in your country and your region. So that's basically how clinical research growth long-term can look like in academia. Definitely having your master's and PhD and publications is super important. Number 2, we're now going to be talking about you building a career in clinical research within a site. Now, site, and especially for clinical trials, usually means like a hospital working on like either physician-led studies or pharma-sponsored studies within hospitals and clinic settings. Sites are typically in Canada run by hospitals, and then within that there's lots of physicians who are hired as attendings, residents, fellows, and they decide to become main investigators of pharma-sponsored clinical trials. So we're just going to focus our career path based on that assumption that you're working in that kind of a site, and what are the roles in there. So the first role, of course, is the same. It's a CTA or a CRA, which is a clinical trial assistant or a clinical research assistant, very similar level of salary as academia. But the role is, of course, a little bit more different because you have a little bit more like invasive or high risk trials, whereas in academia, you do a little bit more like minimal risk and qualitative clinical research. So the salary range, of course, once again, CTAs and RAs make around 35 to 55,000 a year. Of course, with years of experience, it does go up to like 55, 60,000 a year in Canada. Now, after that, you can actually become a clinical trial coordinator, which is a very common role hired by a lot of hospital sites. It's a very common title, and it basically means you're not just assisting, but you're kind of responsible making sure all the pieces fall together. I have worked as a clinical trial coordinator, and I have made a lot of videos about what the day-to-day looks like, what kind of jobs I've had. I'll be linking down all of these interesting videos for you guys up here and down there. Don't forget to check them out. Now, when you move to a coordinator position, your salary could be really anywhere between 50,000 a year to 70,000 a year in Canada, and that really depends on the number of projects that you're handling, how many clinical trials you're handling, how many patients does it have, how large scale is it, how much revenue is being generated for the team from there, how much kind of responsibility and time constraints you have. Are you doing all of it, or are you just doing the coordinating portion? But also sometimes I did the coordination, but I also managed like some of the finances, budgets, and invoicing, as well as some of the ethics applications and so on. So that really determines your salary package as a coordinator. Now, after coordinator, it's a little bit more challenging to jump up, because typically in these site levels, to become a principal investigator, you would need to be an MD in a typical clinical trial. And that's not the way that most clinical researchers want to go. However, if you're not gonna go to med school and become an MD, there are other ways to grow within the site level as well. So you can become things like, kind of clinical trial manager if your site has many different kind of trials running at the same time. Not every hospital has this position, so this position is kind of, I would say, fewer and far between. Like the larger hospitals and the larger clinics will have them, and a lot of the role of a project manager or a clinical program manager will be kind of to establish new partnerships with pharma and provide guidance and training and determine hiring and how the projects are running and do problem solving instead of doing the day-to-day nitty-gritties. So program managers can make anywhere between 80,000 to 120,000. Again, once again, depending on the scale of the hospital, and if you're only a program manager for a certain department or for like the whole hospital or for some subspecialties, how many overall clinical coordinators are under you and how many clinical trial projects are under you, what kind of revenue that generates, all of that kind of go to determine your position and your salary package. After that, there are ways to go up, but again, it is harder. Of course, it's harder as you keep climbing up. It's more of a management positions as being a director of a clinical program, and can require 10 to 20 years of experience, and typically experience spanning multiple industries or experience spanning multiple hospitals and CROs and pharma, because in these positions you're really setting the tone for where things are gonna be headed for your institution, how much of a research focus you're gonna have, how to partner with your existing physicians and maybe encourage a research culture and a trial culture, and how to align that with the brand of the hospital and the image of the hospital and kind of all of that, like setting the whole tone. As really a senior management position to be a director, but of course focusing on the finance aspect, the management aspect, ensuring that your organization is avoiding ethical violations and how that has been going over the years, kind of doing analytical reports, presenting to the board, doing meetings with senior level hospital staff and administrators and clinicians as well, and seeing how best you can support them with resources and streamlining processes, making maybe ethics applications easier, or creating like a facilitator support team to help the physicians and their respective coordinators and teams run the trials better. So this kind of a role can go anywhere between like 90,000 a year, 150,000, 200,000 a year in Canada, and it would really depend on, once again, how big the organization is you're working for, how many directors are there, are you the sole director handling all of these projects, are there multiple directors for each of the departments? It really depends on a lot of these things, but this is like a real sweet spot to be in your clinical research career if you're staying within the hospital setting. And you would see people typically with at least 20 years of experience or 30 years of experience doing these kind of roles. Now we're gonna move on from this hospital side to our point number 3, is if you're trying to build a clinical research career in pharma companies or in CROs, which are contract research organizations. Okay, so for number 3, we're talking about pharma and CROs. Now, just as we talked about with site, once again, you start off at the bottom as a clinical trials assistant. However, the trajectory is a little bit different. From going from like a clinical trial assistant making like $20, $30 an hour to become a clinical research associate, unlike in academia, you don't need a PhD in pharma, which is excellent. Like in industry, it's all about your skills and your experiences and a little bit less about your on-paper academic qualifications. So I definitely love that about it. If you don't want to be in school for like 5 years and you don't want the teaching aspect of it, then pharma might be the place for you to be. So to move up to a clinical trial assistant, to a clinical research associate, to a clinical senior research associate, these jumps really take experience and skill and intuition and assertiveness, and the roles really differ because typically a clinical research associate or a senior clinical research associate is often functioning not just as an analyst but also as a coordinator and a site monitor, which means a lot of the times your work will be remote, while a lot of the times you will have to go in person and visit like these sites where trial participants are recruited and the trial is actually happening. So there's a lot of travel time, there's a lot of like auditing kind of functions like that. And essentially they want a lot of experience, so a lot of people go into it directly. But I have seen, by talking to a lot of my colleagues in the industry, that they do often prefer people who have site level experience. So a couple of years working for hospitals as a research assistant, research coordinator, and then going to pharma, you do bring a fresh perspective of like what challenges sites can face, and so how best you can support them from a pharma sponsor perspective. So typically, as you're going up, once again, your assistant or CTA salaries will be like 35 to 50,000 a year. And then as you're going up, a clinical research associate salary can range like 50,000, 70,000, 75,000 with experience. Also, along with experience, it matters like how big of a pharma company you're working for. Are you like the sole one managing all of these sites in a region, or are there more people doing it? Are you the one visiting like maybe all of Vancouver and all of Ontario, or are you just like doing a couple of sites in a city and things like that? So how much responsibility you can take and how much experience and skills you can bring to the team also determine like your salary packet. And then senior clinical research associates can make good money between like 70,000 to 95,000 a year on average in Canada. And then you basically go up to become like a manager. So you could become like a trial program manager or regional manager, clinical data manager, and making close to like 100,000, 120,000, up to 150,000. So once again, to determine how much you make as a manager within like a pharma company or a CRO, it really depends on the scale of the organization and how much the workload is, and of course your own experience and how much you can handle taking independent management decisions and troubleshooting and delivering on certain deliverables like numbers and revenue and smooth functioning. Like certain identifiers will show your managers and your higher ups that you're able to manage maybe 20 different sites, meet your recruitment targets for the year with minimal deviations of protocol, with minimal ethical issues, with very minimal like issues that have to be escalated that high by the site. You're able to keep a good report. You're kind of catching things on your site monitors visit, so later on there's no like data exclusion issues coming up, things like that. So if you can like demonstrate to them that you are able to take on that workload, and I should warn you, people with that kind of workload sleep very little and work sometimes 40, 60 hours a week. You're not getting paid by the hour. These are salaried positions, and you really have that corporate private sector environment. By that point, you have to be like super efficient in your leadership role and your management. So then, of course, around that $120,000, $150,000 a year range, you can go up to become director, regional director. So there is a lot more step-by-step growth opportunity and a higher salary ceiling when you go into the private sector and go into pharma companies. CROs will end at one point because CROs essentially don't usually have anything above like a manager. Very few people make it to a director position even if they have one. But essentially the CRA's role is not to do like full scale like drug development, testing, bring it back, bring it to market. So they only outsource and implement the trial management part from various bigger pharma companies who don't want to do it themselves. That's why they're called contract research organizations. So CROs will be a little bit more interesting than I think hospital sites, but will not have as many positions and as high a way to go as like a pharma company, which is like full stack, like doing all of their own trials, managing their own trials, doing R&D, bringing drugs to market. Like I don't want to take any names, but I think you know which of the big name pharma companies are doing that. So having said that, for these larger scale pharma companies, you can go up to become director, regional director. You can be in charge of like all of the North American sites and all of the North American studies. There could be like 5 or 6 disease systems spanning like 30 to 50 different clinical trials. And they could be, you could be like managing everything in Asia or everything in Europe and things like that. And then like VP, global director, all of these. Of course, there's lots of role in parallel. It's not like you're just going into clinical research and automatically going higher up. No, as soon as you go to manager and above, there are going to be people from all the other parts of clinical research also applying. There's going to be clinical nurse specialists and clinical data managers who are all trying to get into like these management roles. So you do have people coming in from parallel roles. Some come from site and do CTA, research associate, senior research associate, and apply. Some come in from like a clinical world where they have done maybe trial coordinator, there may be a nurse, they're a clinical nurse specialist, and they're going up. Some come from a more data and analytics background. Some come from like pharmacovigilance. Some come from like various different pharmacological backgrounds and stuff, and they want to apply to these mid-level and senior level management roles to make like up to $250,000, $300,000 a year. And of course, there's very few positions. Is it something every one of us is gonna do? I don't know. I don't even know if it's meant to be that everybody goes to like these management decisions. Some of people, including myself, I think I really enjoy site level stuff while I still have patient interaction. And as high as you go in the management chain, you get a lot less of patient interaction, if at all. You get a lot less of entry-level staff interaction. You deal a lot less with the day-to-days of each clinical trial, and you see them all kind of as a whole, as like, okay, these are all of our numbers. How do we know how they're doing? What are the metrics we're studying them by? You know, in terms of revenue, in terms of like, you know, how many drugs have come to market and what was the duration of time, in terms of did we stick to the timelines we had predicted? When we developed this drug, we assumed in 3 years the studies would be done, and in 5 years it would be in the market. Did that actually happen? Are our timing projections working? And what are the most common barriers kind of preventing them from happening? So once again, I have checked it out for you guys that in the US, they do have higher salaries in pharma as you keep going up to mid and senior level management positions compared to Canada. But essentially, between 200,000, 300,000 a year is pretty standard if you're like a mid to senior manager. And of course, it can keep going higher as you go to like VP and so on, other positions. At that point, it's a lot less about your technical skills. It's a lot more about leadership and management and intuition and other human, very soft skills as well. But in order to get to that kind of position, you do need a good solid 10, 20 years of experience and a great portfolio, great network of having managed and having done stuff from the ground up. So everything you're doing right now is adding up and can give you lots of opportunities. So this was it for today. Whether or not you're planning to stay at site, work for a CRO or hospital, or build a very fulfilling career in academia in clinical research, I hope that you get to do what you want to do. I hope this video has been able to kind of show you some of the opportunities that exist and some of the pathways of career pathways that exist within clinical research in all these three major fields. Of course, there can be stuff I've missed out. If you have any further questions, don't forget to let me know in an email, Instagram DM, or comment down below. That's probably going to be the fastest for me to get back to you guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you want more content like this, don't forget to hit subscribe and stay in touch with my channel. I post every single week. So I will see you next time. And this was The Brown Feminist. Bye.